with that said, we'll go ahead and get started here with understanding Google Analytics. So what we're going to be going over here just, throughout the presentation is, okay, so what is Google Analytics? Making sure that we're all on the same page here when it comes to understanding what the program is and also even how we sign up for it and get it implemented. Then we're going to go into more of navigating the platform. It does change from time to time and has changed over the past couple of years with user experience, as well as then really kind of diving into kind of what I like to dub kind of the awesome analytics, the base analytics that you're going to see across Google Analytics, as well as usually the higher ROI ones. And then last but not least is kind of the strategy. How do we then apply these stats, metrics, and analytics to our digital marketing and to our business as a whole? So the first thing is just making sure that we're on the same page here. So Google Analytics is a completely free platform that Google offers to any small, large, medium-sized businesses, any website out there, you can apply Google Analytics to. And so a couple things with it is that it's implemented by just putting in a code. So some of this is long code, some of it's a short code. What's really kind of nice about it is, pretty much any web system that you're using out there, if it's WordPress, if it's Weebly, if it's Squarespace, Wix, whatever it may be, has an opportunity to add this to it. Now, what you probably have to do is just simply Google, how do I add Google Analytics to WordPress, to Squarespace, et cetera, and it will walk you through. What's really nice about it though is once you get the code implemented and set, it's set for good and you don't need to, again, change it or mess with it. It's just making sure that you get this one-time code set onto the site and then looking to make sure that it stays there. And what I mean by that is if you rebuild the site or you do any, major website redevelopment or maintenance, making sure that you're not messing with that code. And then the other thing to also remember too about Google Analytics is always forward kind of recording. And what that means is Google Analytics cannot retroactively go get data. This is why I always encourage, if you're on this presentation, if you're watching this presentation, to make sure at the end of this that you go check and make sure that your website has Google Analytics. You may not be prepared right now to do all the things that we're going to talk about today or to dive into this, but when you are ready, you want to make sure that you're kind of collecting analytics. To be honest with you, really good analytics dives start to happen when we have about a year's worth of data. Now, again, we can still look at stuff previously and I'll understand why that's the case, but to give you an idea of how it does take time to make sure that we get this going, as well as we make sure that we're recording this. So at the end of this, make sure you go in and check to make sure that Google Analytics is not only installed, but then running correctly, because if it comes undone, or if you didn't install it correctly, or you don't have Google Analytics, then again, you're not going to be able to retroactively go get that data. And then last but not least, I always like to kind of mention is that, again, Google Analytics is used on small micro-sized businesses like us. On sites like everyone watching this, it can be used on all of our sites, but then also it can be used by some really large companies like NASA, Samsung, Twitter that also use Google Analytics. And we're using essentially the same platform. The only thing that they get is they're getting some just higher end customization with reports and support along with that. So really, it's kind of cool that the same platform that we can use for a big company can also be pared down for a small company as well. Now, that's also why we want to kind of go through this a little bit for you, is that Google Analytics can sometimes be overwhelming. There's honestly probably more data than you need or ever knew or want to deal with on Google Analytics. So we just want to make sure that we understand, again, okay, Ben, where do we start with this? Where do we then kind of go from there, and what is the really good ROI analytics for us that we can really kind of maintain and analyze and then implement? So the first thing I like to kind of do is just making sure we know where we're going on Google Analytics. So there's 5 main components to Google Analytics. The first in the bottom left, you can see there, that's the admin section. We'll go over that briefly, but this is where you would actually add users to your account, add filters, get the tracking code. So if you need to go in, you set up your account and you need to then install Google Analytics, or maybe you need to reinstall it, this is where you'd go find that code. Number 2 is the account analytics menu. This is where, so Google has a ton of predetermined reports. We're not going to really get into customized reports. We have a whole other kind of a phase 2 Google Analytics 2.0 course that we talk about there, but you can actually customize any reports that you want. But honestly, Google has a ton, dozens upon dozens of predetermined reports and different variations of those reports that you can kind of go into, and they put them into those 5 different buckets that you see on the left-hand side. We're going to go through each one of those buckets and really kind of piece together which reports are going to be the best for you, which reports are going to give you the best ROI, and everything along those lines. But this is where we're going to kind of navigate within those. Number 3 is probably one of the more important tools that you can get. This is the date range. So always make sure, so like when you open up a Google Analytics account, or even when you go back either on the app or on the website, what's kind of funny is they always do a week comparison. So they always pull the previous week of data that you're looking at. Obviously that's important because most likely you're going to want to be looking and analyzing more than just a week's worth of data. So you want to make sure that you're using this tool. The other kind of cool thing about the date range tool is that you can compare to previous periods. This is honestly probably the most important tool as a marketer, or as even a small business owner that's trying to analyze this data, because yes, it's great to look at a snapshot of data, but if we don't know has it been improving, has it been negatively, again, impacting, at what is impacting it. So we can use the date range to, maybe it's comparing this month compared to last month. It's maybe this quarter compared to last quarter. But more importantly, we can even do, I kind of alluded to this on the previous slide, is we can actually start to compare year over year. Obviously, year over year, January 1 to June 30th of 2020 compared to that same time period in 2019, it, again, really helps us, again, get rid of sometimes seasonality. It may not be fair to compare one month to another because of some of the seasonality that's there. Obviously, this year we've had some other extenuating circumstances that most likely will be affecting your data, but just for all intents and purposes, a lot of times year over year data can be really helpful for you analyzing it. I also mentioned that because you can kind of see in the middle of your screen here, you should be able to see some green numbers and some red numbers. What's also kind of nice is when you compare date ranges on Google, it actually does the math for you and then color codes it to obviously show you that green is good, red is bad. So you can see this example here that we saw a lot of growth with the green numbers, 31% for sessions, 27% for page views, but we actually went down in pages per session by 3%, average session duration. And we'll get into all those, but this is where you'd kind of see that. And then finally, the last 2 kind of components of Google Analytics is going to be the shortcut menu. This is where you can save reports, you can export them, you can share them via email. So pretty much whatever you need to do, you're able to kind of do with that shortcut kind of menu, which is really kind of nice, especially if you're going to be consistently doing this. Like for instance, the save functionality, you can actually have these reports emailed to you on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. So you could save these reports, put them all into an email, and then email them to yourself every month, and you don't even have to go to google.com/analytics or via the app or wherever you're again pulling that into. Also, exporting it into a PDF makes it really easy and visually pleasing to share. Sometimes just sharing it via email is also quick and simple. So just make sure you kind of pay attention to the shortcut menu, because if you're just doing it yourself, great. Maybe you want it emailed, but a lot of us, a lot of times, are working with other individuals that we need to share these reports, and that's how that's going to be done. And then last but not least is the search functionality. Google is obviously, at the end of the day, the search engine, the largest search engine at that. And so with the search functionality, we can always, if you have questions about what something means, or more importantly, you want to find a specific report, like for instance, after this presentation, maybe you see that I went to the mobile report and you're like, oh, Ben, I don't remember where that mobile report was, but I really wanted to see what Ben showed us. Well, again, we can just go up there and search mobile, bam, it will give you the result, send you right to the mobile report. So this can also be helpful if you just don't remember where reports are, or if you're trying to find a specific report to see if it exists for something that you're trying to track. So encourage you just to kind of make sure to familiarize yourself with all 5. Make sure that we know what they are, because they are obviously, some are very simple, some are more useful, and some are going to be tools that we're going to be using on a daily basis if we're using Google Analytics at that. So the first is just the admin section. Just spend a little bit of time here. It's kind of obviously self-explanatory. This is, again, the administrator kind of portal, but a couple things here. This is where you can give access to people. So you don't have to give out your username and password. You could, if you're working with Skol Marketing, hypothetically, you can just add my email, Theis@Skol Marketing, to this, and then now I can log in via my account and see your account, and you can actually look at the different access levels and control all of that. So, again, it's just really kind of nice to be able to do that. Also, this is where we can set up filters. So one filter that I like to kind of mention to people about is your IP filter. So if you want to filter out, when you're going to your website or your staff members are going to your website, you can set up a filter via IP. And when anyone ever connected to that Wi-Fi network or whatever network you have, again, associated with that, then it won't actually track that traffic there. So you can even be a little bit more strategic with making sure it's pared down to actual users. There's obviously other filters that you can kind of experiment with in here. Also, this is where we can manage the automated reports. I told you about the shortcut menu on the previous screen. If you start saving those different reports, then we can actually manage those, and we can send those to multiple people. You can manage them how, if you only want them to be sent for the next 6 months, if you want them to be sent continuously, whatever it may be, you can actually manage that in here. And then last but not least, also, there's a bunch of other stuff in the admin section, but these are like the 3 most important ones, or the ones that most people are going to deal with, is that you can also see the tracking info. I know I alluded to that before. So if we ever lose the tracking info, have to re-implement, again, Google Analytics or anything like that, that's where we're going to be able to do that here.
We had a quick question, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
Somebody asked if you will show or tell us how to check if Google Analytics is installed on the website.
Yep, that's actually a perfect thing. It's actually a great segue into this. So I will actually get into that in about 30 seconds. Perfect. So it's a perfect question. And honestly, I will admit that Google does not do the best job of having just a quick and simple, like, hey, did you install this correctly? Thumbs up or thumbs down. Seems very easy, in my opinion, on something they could do, but it's just not there necessarily. But with that being said, it's a great question for a segue is, okay, so these are the 5 main kind of reports, or the report buckets, if you will, kind of categories. These are the ones on the analytics menu on the left-hand side, or in the app, obviously in the hamburger kind of drop-down menu that you're going to be able to see. So the 5 different ones are real-time. This is obviously exactly what's happening on your website in that moment. We have audience. This is going to be the information about the actual users on your site. The acquisition is, how did those users actually get to your site? Behavior is, once those users got to your site, what are they doing? And then last but not least is conversions. Are they doing what you want them to do by telling Google, like, hey, this is what I'm tracking. Are they doing what we want them to do? So we're going to go through all of these. So the first one, though, is real time. We're actually just going to spend a tiny bit of time here on that one, because I will say real time is more, again, more interesting than actually useful, because yes, it's really kind of cool if you're giving a huge presentation, if you, again, know that people should be on your site at a certain time. It's really kind of cool to look at the real time analytics and to kind of see what's going on. But for all intents and purposes, mainly it's obviously just a snapshot within those seconds that you're looking at it. So it's, again, like I said, it's going to be more cool than useful. But with the question that we just had, Will, is that this is also where you can just verify that Google Analytics is working correctly. So if you ever are just nervous and want to make sure that Google Analytics is installed correctly, especially if you're reinstalling this or confirming it for the first time, or just, again, if you are just installing it for the first time or reinstalling it, what you want to do is go to the real-time analytics, again, menu, and then open up, like, take your phone and just go to, again, for example, I would just go to skolmarketing.com. And then while you're looking at the real-time, you're actually within about 10 to 20 seconds, you should actually see that you just jumped onto the site. If you see nothing there, that means it's not recording it for some reason. Now, again, you want to make sure that you didn't filter out your IP stuff before doing it. That's why a phone is really good, especially on a non-Wi-Fi network, just to double check. So again, you would just go to real-time the reports. You would take your phone on an LTE network not connected to Wi-Fi, just type in your website, and when you go there, you'll actually see the real-time say, hey, we just had a new user. Most likely it's going to go from 0 to 1. To be honest with you, in full transparency, that most small business owners and most small business websites, you probably aren't going to have a ton of traffic at that second that you're looking at. Having 1, 2, 3 is very normal. Could even be 0, and that's fine too, unless obviously and there should be a reason that people are on your site there. But real-time report is a great way just to make sure, some good peace of mind, to make sure that you have Google Analytics tracked and installed correctly. Okay, so now getting into a little bit, again, the different reports, but before we start that is I want to take a minute to really kind of talk about what I've kind of dubbed awesome analytics. The reason we kind of dubbed these this, as well as why this is important to know these kind of main 8, is that all of these main 8 stats that you see here are essentially utilized on every report that we're going to talk about and are used to compare. So what I mean by that is when we look at the geographic report, when we look at the acquisition report, it's going to compare the amount of users for each different, again, category or thing that we're looking at. As an example, geographic report. We're going to compare the users, the average session duration, all 8 of these that you see, between Minneapolis, St. Paul, New York. If we're looking at the mobile report, it's going to use the different mobile devices and use all 8 of these. If we're using the acquisition report or the behavior report, again, all of those different types of things that we're tracking are going to use these 8 base stats and analytics as the way to actually create the reports. So it's important that we know what these actually mean and what they're actually looking to analyze. So the first one is called users. That is the number of users that visited the site. So essentially these are people. These are people that came to the site. So in this example here at the top, we had 1,713 essentially users or people come to the site during this predetermined time, whichever one, again, was selected. Now, new users are actually ones that were designated new by Google. Now, Google does this by cookies. It's not a perfect system, but this at least starts to hopefully give you an idea of who is new and who's returning, to kind of give you a better idea of, obviously, as a business owner, and depending on your business, we want to make sure that we have new users coming to the site, that it's not necessarily the same people. Now, again, some things are necessarily going to influence that, like if you have payment portals or you have a subscription site, obviously you're going to have much more people coming back to the site that are not new than someone that, for instance, doesn't have any of those kind of things and is just out there just trying to get more leads. But it's important that we understand that it's users and new users, very similar. So you can see here that this was most likely a new website that we're looking at here, because out of the 1713 users, 1708 of them were new. So the next month that they look at this, that new users number is most likely going to be way down. Now, sessions are the amount of times that those users visited the site. So what that means is this example right here, that means that these 1,713 people visited the site 1,958 times. So we had people visiting the site multiple times. This obviously is calculated within Google, within kind of the cookies and the tracking mechanism, but this is important to distinguish what a user is and what a session is. So again, a user is going to be the actual person. Session is going to be the times that they visited the site. So again, we can kind of see here, number of sessions per user is just going to be simple math, taking the sessions, divided it by users. And so we see that every time that someone came to the site, they essentially visited the site 1.14 times, again, per session. Now, page views are going to be when they're actually on your site during those collective sessions. How many pages did they actually view? Again, pages per session is going to be simple math. This is an example of 1.86 pages per session. Then moving along to average session duration. This is going to be when they were on for all those 1,958 sessions, how long were they actually on your site? One thing about session duration too, just so you know, is Google does have technology that they have to be kind of moving their, again, kind of cursor within kind of Google's parameters to be counted. So what I mean by that is if you went to your cabin and pulled up your website on your computer up there and then left it, again, and you didn't come back for a week, it doesn't track the entire week or whatever. It knows some of the activity within a certain kind of parameters of time within there to kind of obviously be more useful and more strategic and more specific for that. Average session duration, that's what we just kind of talked about. But last but not least is bounce rate. So bounce rate is the percentage of people that looked at one page before exiting the site. Most likely, a lot of times, kind of that back button. Now, again, this is another indicator of, as we go through this presentation and as you start to look at Google Analytics, you're going to be looking at a lot of quantitative data and qualitative data. Bounce rate is one of those types of things where users and sessions, that's quantitative data. It's great that we had 1,700 users for this example, but also what was the quality of that traffic? We could potentially, that could be great, and I'll get into some examples here, but it also could be awful depending on things like a bounce rate. So some things to look at here, I know one of the questions that I always get, Ben, is, okay, well, what are some benchmarks to look at for these different awesome analytics? How do I know if I'm, again, progressing or doing the right thing or my website's good or bad? And so part of the answer to that, though, is just to know is this is why we want to start tracking analytics, because even if I give you benchmarks, if you're below those, well, that's obviously an opportunity to improve, and we want to make sure that we're seeing that improvement. So meaning that obviously we want to see that month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, we're improving upon these things, even if we're not reaching those benchmarks, or even if we are reaching those benchmarks, making sure we can go as high as possible. So again, since users, new users, and sessions are all quantitative data, there's no real benchmark for that. Because like I said, you could have 1,000, you could have 10,000 users, but depending on the qualitativeness of it, it's going to determine if that's good or bad traffic. So where we actually start to get into some of the ones that I want you to kind of pay attention to is, for instance, pages per session. Pages per session, we really want to try to reach about a 2.5 to a 3.0 pages per session. So you can see in this example, 1.86, that would be below our, again, kind of goal or our threshold. The reason for that is we want to make sure that people are visiting more pages on our site, or at least a few pages, because most likely your user experience that you've dev'd out on or designed out on your website probably requires them at least a little bit to make sure that they can verify that you do the service, verify your team, or do something like that, and or find out more information if that's via FAQs or blogs, and then decide to essentially kind of go with you. Now, again, if you're below that, that's fine, and you may be being successful as it is, but it's something to kind of work towards and to try to kind of manage. Now, one of the questions I get too is, well, Ben, how do I improve pages per session? And unfortunately, that is a much larger question, but there are some things that we can allude to, like, for instance, making sure that our services have their own pages, making sure that our navigation is very easy to get to, making sure that our website speed and our, like our hosting or just our website in general is as fast as possible, making sure that people can find like a contact button. So, I mean, and those things may seem very simple, and they are, but you'd be amazed that if we start there, we can really start to look at pages per session. Another thing to also improve pages per session is to make sure you have multiple pages. Be creating more content. If that's more service pages or more specific service pages or white papers or blogs or articles, obviously you give people another opportunity to make sure that they can stay on your site longer. So it starts with not only the navigation, making sure that people know how to get to that, and we'll talk about that actually at the behavior reports, but then also making sure you have enough of that content to actually make sure that you can have more than a couple pages. If you only have one, if you have one of those styles of websites where you only have one page, or you only have 1 or 2 pages, well, of course, then your pages per session are going to be a lot less than someone that has 15, 20, 50, 100 pages as well. Average session duration is another one that's kind of, that gets a little tricky to say kind of a benchmark for. But what I usually try to tell people is that, people can do a lot within usually 30 to 60 seconds. It also kind of depends on what your business or what your industry is. So sometimes I usually tell people is take out your phone, take out your computer, and literally just time yourself for whatever the average session duration is and see how much you can do on your site. you'd probably be amazed at how much you can get through in, again, in this time in 56 seconds. But also, like, for instance, where maybe this wouldn't be, if this would be potentially a good number if we're a very, again, we're a business service, we're a consumer service, and it's kind of quick in, quick out. But now if we're maybe a medical or a legal field, most likely we want them to be spending some more time because they probably have to do a little bit more research. If it's a medical, if we're doing, again, something about a certain modality, or a legal, we have a certain, again, area of practice. So you also have to kind of be considerate about what the mission of your website is. Like, I'll give you an example here. I have a client that does emergency ice dam removal. Well, again, I can tell you he has an awful pages per session and an awful average session duration if we were to go off of comparing it to my benchmarks. But for him and his website, obviously, if you have an emergency with an ice dam and it's leaking, you're just going to go to the site, you want to make sure it's there, and then you want that information and you're calling them. So again, like I said, all of these things are going to be a little specific to you, but at least if we can, pages per session, if we can try to do that 2.5 to 3, average session duration, you can do quite a bit within 40 to 60 seconds. And then last but not least is bounce rate. We want bounce rate to be as low as possible, because the lower it is, that means that they're viewing more than one page, which a lot of times is going to yield higher kind of qualitative traffic. But I will say an average bounce rate is usually between about 50 to 60%. So like this example, this is a little higher of a bounce rate. Now we want to try and get that as low, again, like I said, as possible. Now we have some clients that are between like the 20 and 30% bounce rate. That's phenomenal. We have other clients that when they come to us, they may have an 80, I've even seen 90%, again, bounce rate. So we need to kind of be considerate about that. Again, some things that can affect bounce rate right off the, bat is making sure the right content is, again, is there, that it's loading fast enough. If you're running any kind of PPC or SEM like Google AdWords campaigns, to make sure that that that's always going to increase your bounce rate, just because those people a lot of times are in and then out. So it's kind of being cognizant of what's there. But again, that's where an average bounce rate's about 50 to 60%. So if we're higher than that, we might want to start looking at, it really kind of comes down to user experience, because there is a reason that someone went to the site and then clicked the back button and did that. We want to make sure that they have the correct, again, user experience. So that may be looking at your site, looking at it on different devices, looking at the speed, looking at the navigation, to make sure, just like we were talking about with pages per session, a lot of these things kind of flow together. When you have higher pages per session, you're going to have lower bounce rates. You're probably going to have, your average session duration is probably going to be increased as well. So they all essentially kind of feed off of each other and can be improved with all of the same type of things that I kind of alluded to, which is kind of nice. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, so moving on to kind of the audience report. So again, we kind of talked about, again, before, the awesome analytics was the 8 main, again, type of analytics that you're going to see on all these reports. Now the the audience analytics report, this is the default one. So if we just went back, if we actually just went back here to like the beginning here, when I was showing you this overview, when you upload and, again, you go into Google Analytics, you're going to get a little snapshot, and audience is always listed number 1. And it's kind of like the first report that we look at. The reason for this, and this is kind of how Google has actually kind of layered this out, is between audience to acquisition to behavior to conversions, it's going from the most quantitative data to the most qualitative data. So that's how also we kind of can, again, view this, and then also, again, kind of analyze this and kind of go through the progressions. So the first report, a lot of times we want to look at, is the audience. We want to get the qualitative data that we're dealing with. We want to get like, okay, this is what it is. And then each of the next 3 steps and 3 different types of reports, we're going to look at qualifying that more and more. So the first one is that we can get demographics. So this is going to be, we can actually get age ranges and actually gender. So, again, this can be super, again, beneficial if we're trying to look at that. One caveat to know about the demographics reports is that at the top, it will show you what percentage of your audience this can be applied to. Sometimes it may only be 25 to 30%. So you obviously just have to know that variable when you're kind of looking at this. It may be higher than that, but again, it can be some really good reports for you to kind of, again, see different age ranges. If you're looking at millennials to baby boomers, if you're looking at gender, male versus female, whatever it may be, looking at that can be obviously super valuable for that, for whatever you're kind of trying to look to analyze. Also, some other kind of good reports too are behavior. So there's some new reports here within engagement, so we can actually see, okay, how engaging were some of the different demographics or some of the geographic ones where we can actually see, we can actually kind of splice some of these different ones together and see, okay, well, how actually engaged were they? If we're, again, looking at pages per session, we can just kind of actually parse that out a little bit further to kind of see who engages with our site the most. I talked about this previously, but we can also then start to analyze new versus returning, and then also apply some different demographics to them as well. The geo reports are probably one of the most popular reports, and for obvious reasons. If you are a local or small business and your area is going to be, like, for instance, if we're in Minnesota here, is your area maybe the state of Minnesota? Maybe if you're a plumber, or a service area, maybe it's just the Twin Cities. That obviously is important to look at and to drill down into those, because like we talked about, you could have 10,000 visitors, but hypothetically, if 7,000 of those were from an outside the country or outside the state, it doesn't even matter. We can pat ourselves on the back that we had 10,000, but that doesn't really mean anything to us because it was all garbage. So this is, one of the locations we can actually start to pare it down to where we want to look at. So you can actually pare it down from continent to country to state to city, which is also really kind of nice. Also, as we kind of alluded to before, is remember, any of these we can compare to each other. So again, the demographics, we can compare, again, we can compare the different age ranges to each other. The location, we can, again, compare, we can compare Minneapolis to St. Paul. We can compare Bloomington to New York if we want. So again, we can start to do these comparisons and actually start to see a little bit of the different awesome analytics that we went over previously. So we could compare the average session duration for Minneapolis to St. Paul. We can compare the bounce rates between the different cities. That's really where you can, again, where a lot of rubber hits the road is when you start doing some of those comparisons. Also languages, you can see how people, again, this is especially useful to individuals that have different languages that they may be servicing, or bilingual themselves, or a bilingual demographic. You can actually see which languages people are pulling up your site in and analyzing or experiencing your site, which can be useful. And then last but not least, one of my favorite reports is the mobile report. This will actually show you then how many people and what they're doing. Again, all those stats and analytics that we talked about, those 8 awesome analytics, from desktop to mobile to tablet. So we can compare the mobile bounce rate compared to the desktop bounce rate. We can compare the users that went on a tablet compared to mobile. And again, remember, then we can also layer this on for when we add the date ranges. If you've been running this, we can compare then, the mobile traffic month over month, year over year. I guarantee you that if you've been, for instance, if you've been having Google Analytics running for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you would, again, I tell you, run a report on the mobile report and just see the exponential increase. Doesn't matter if you're business to business or business to consumer, you're going to see an increase in mobile traffic. On average now, the average client actually has, again, more traffic from a mobile device than an actual desktop themselves. So, again, it's important to kind of do that. And that also gets into when we start talking about on the previous screen, how do we increase pages per session? How do we lower bounce rate? Well, again, we also want to look at, okay, let's look at it per device. And maybe there's something there on the mobile device. Maybe it's slower. Maybe it's super slow and there's some error that's happening and blocking people, or vice versa on the desktop or whatever. It just gives you kind of clues into what's happening to allow us to analyze that. So the next report is the acquisition report. So again, audience was who was on our site, and more of a just very, again, quantitative type of basis. Now we're getting a little bit more into qualitative analysis. And so now we're looking at, okay, we know that 10,000 people were maybe on our site for the past 6 months. But now we break that down and we want to know, how do they actually get to our site? To be honest with you, these are my actual favorite reports, because these can really start to help you understand the ROI of your marketing efforts, if that's both internal or external. So there are approximately 7 different types of channels are where traffic can kind of come from that Google tracks. So the first one is called direct. Direct traffic is going to be when someone types in your website. So that would be like, for instance, I go to my phone and I type in skolmarketing.com. Direct traffic is mainly going to be those that already know you, because they're obviously, again, looking at either a business card, a postcard, or you told them, or a previous client of yours, or a current client of yours, and they already know that your website exists and they need to go there for some reason. So direct traffic is, again, important. A lot of times, if you're just starting a business, a lot of times you'll see direct traffic as your number one source of traffic, for obvious reasons, because direct can also be related to offline marketing, because, again, you're going around giving people a business card, you're sending them maybe mailers, again, in the mail, and they're getting a postcard, all of these different type of things where they look at it and then they have to type out the address. Or again, as you build up your network, as you go to BNI meetings or other networking after dark or after work kind of meetings and things like that, you can then obviously, again, it's going to be much more of a, you tell them about it and then they go to the website. That's really what direct traffic is. Organic traffic is going to be any type of search engine. So it's not only going to track Google for you, but it's also going to track Bing and Yahoo and a couple of the other, like DuckDuckGo and some of these other search engines you may not have heard of, but it's tracking all of the traffic that came from organic. Now, organic, this is probably the one that you want to sometimes pay attention the most, because this is sometimes one of the most valuable types of traffic, because for all base purposes is that this is the type of traffic that we're tracking that people didn't know that we existed, but we're looking for our products or services. So this, a lot of times, organic is related to kind of your SEO efforts or your search engine optimization, either the efforts that you're doing or the stuff that's happening naturally. But organic is a really important one to focus on, because a lot of times you're going to see a very high ROI with organic if we grow that correctly. So referral traffic is going to be any traffic that comes from a website that is not a search engine and not a social media site. So this is, for instance, if you're listed on the Better Business Bureau, for example, if you have a BNI profile, if you have a sister site and you guys kind of link back and forth, if you have a friend that has a site and wrote a blog about you, bam, it's right there. The Star Tribune did a blog about, or an article about maybe the top 10 pizza places, and then link to every one of them. That's going to be referral traffic. So referral traffic is important to kind of monitor, because obviously it's kind of coming from another source, but it's also important to monitor because this is where a lot of times spam traffic lives. This goes back to, again, what I was talking about is we get the quantitative data with audience report, and now these next 3 different types of reports with acquisition behavior and conversion are going to be then kind of qualifying that data. This is a prime example. Again, you could have had 10,000 visitors the last month, but if 9,852 of them are spam, well, then obviously that wasn't a very good month, and we have to look at that. So again, referral traffic, and now there should be no reason that you have an extreme example like that, but just to give you an example of why we want to look at referral traffic. It also can help you that if you're ever doing any kind of advertising on other sites or any other kind of advertising agreements on other people's sites or programs or platforms, we can look at kind of the referral traffic and kind of verify that and kind of look at that. And again, remember, all of these then within each other, and I'll get into this in an example, is we can kind of compare them with each other. So organic, we can compare the different search engines. Referral, we can compare the different sites. Social media is obviously going to be the different social media sites. They're already predetermined within, within Google. So it's going to parse out. And remember, this is traffic leaving a social media site and coming here. It's not going to track your likes or your reach or your comments or your shares. That's all done on the platform itself. What you're going to be tracking is how many people left Facebook and came to my website, and then what did they do? How long were they on the site? How many pages did they view? Again, we're using those awesome analytics, that 8-pack, and then being able to kind of compare that together. So that's within social media. One other thing I do like to mention is there is on occasion Facebook or one of the social media sites will sometimes be categorized in referral. It sometimes happen as a glitch, but just know if you see that, there's really nothing you can do or nothing you did wrong. It just sometimes the system just kind of glitches and that's what happens. But again, it should mainly be within social media. So our Instagram traffic, our LinkedIn traffic, our Twitter, et cetera, will be in the social media reports. And again, we can compare them with each other. Paid traffic is going to be if you're running, for instance, any type of like Google Ads campaigns, and you can actually, again, integrate your Google Ad or AdWords campaigns into Google Analytics. And not only can you see all the analytics there, but it will also show up in this pie chart here as paid. Obviously, that's going to be pretty simple, but you can go into there and then compare your different campaigns, compare your different ads and ad groups, and et cetera within that. The last two are going to be email. So this is obviously email marketing. So this is like, for instance, if you have a Constant Contact, if you have a MailChimp, MadMeme, or any of those types of platforms, make sure you take the step. A lot of times in the settings or the account areas, you can actually integrate or make sure that you can connect your Google Analytics there, because then we can get like a lot of the email traffic. So obviously, when somebody clicked on your email campaign or your newsletter, what did they do? And as we're kind of seeing here, we can compare those to the direct traffic, the organic traffic, all of that other stuff. And throughout Google Analytics, the last but not least one is other, or sometimes you'll see not provided. Unfortunately, there are instances where Google cannot track everything. So sometimes there's going to be things, usually it's onesie, twosies, but you can get a couple more than that, is where it's just going to say other for obvious reasons. It's not a perfect system, or someone may have a blocking mechanism or something like that, but it can still see that it's there, but you can't really know what it's doing. So those are going to be the 7 different ones. You can kind of see an example here of not only them kind of compared with each other, we can compare the different bounce rates. In the middle of this graphic here, we can compare the different pages per session. Conversions, I'll kind of go over this, but once you set conversions, it's kind of nice. It'll actually pull into the acquisition. So now we can actually see that when, organic search has in this example, has a 9.21% conversion rate. Direct has a 14.81% conversion rate. So we can kind of see that. You can track revenue, transactions, new sessions and new users and all that other kind of stuff. And then like we kind of talked about is you can click into them and go into them further. Before we get into that, just a couple things as well. One is people always ask me, Ben, again, what should my like little pie chart there look like? And, again, which one should I try to have be the number one? And so again, it kind of just does depend on your business. Also, it depends on if you're doing paid or not. The reason I say that is like if you're doing an advertising campaign on social media, obviously that's going to greatly impact you not doing one of those. If you're doing a advertising campaign on Google, that's obviously going to do that. But taking away kind of the paid ones, usually you want to strive for organic being at the top or right near the top. And again, knowing that if you're just starting your business, most likely direct is going to be there, and direct is very important, but we know those people. So a lot of times we want to start to try to get after kind of the organic, the referral, and the social, because most likely those are more people that we don't know of or we don't have the best relationship with from a business perspective that we want to get to know more. We want them to do more business with us or business in general. And again, you can compare these. This graphic isn't showing the comparison, but if you do a comparison with a date range, it again will show you the different percentages with the red or the green being good or bad as those have changed depending on the comparison of those date ranges. And then last but not least is there's also a kind of a cool thing called Google Search Console, which is another kind of SEO tool. You can actually integrate those into here, and you can get some kind of like some search volume for what people are searching for at a very basic level on your website as well. There used to be some very detailed reports. Unfortunately, Google took those away many years ago because of privacy policies, but we can get some of that search data back by doing Google Search Console, and you can actually integrate that and pull that data into Google Analytics, and that's found under the acquisition tab. So this is an example that I just wanted to kind of show you here of, so when I go into again, like if I go into one of the organic, again, reports, if I go one of the social reports or the referral reports, I can actually start to pare it down and actually start to see more information. So for instance, again, the middle one here, the social network, I can now start to compare Facebook to LinkedIn to Instagram. Under source, I can compare Google compared to Bing, compared to Yahoo. The one on the left here, the source one, is referral traffic. Baidu is in China. Again, you got to see that some of this is spam. So the website bottraffic.xyz, pretty, obvious that that's spam traffic. But I've got some other ones here that aren't, Pro Network MN, famousbbq.com, junk-360.com, actual legitimate sites that I may be doing some work with. And it's important to kind of, again, see the traffic I'm getting there. And obviously I kind of cut these off, but you would see that these would go all the way over, and you'd be able to compare all of those different awesome analytics, that 8-pack that we've been talking about consistently throughout the presentation. You'd be able to see all of those kind of together. Right now we're only seeing sessions, but then just like anything, it goes to users, average session duration, all of that other kind of fun stuff that we've been talking about. But the idea here is that you can compare all of those together, which is really kind of fun to do. And that's honestly, that's where the real analysis starts to happen, because again, if I know that, yes, maybe I have more users on Facebook than on LinkedIn, but if I start looking at it and I have more qualitative results on LinkedIn, well, that may alter what I decide to do, if that's either spending more time, money, or energy on one platform or another, or verifying some of the efforts that I'm doing there. If I'm hiring either internally or externally marketing help, obviously this can start to help you actually put an ROI and validate those efforts. Okay, so the next type of report is going to be the behavior report. So now we know who came to our site, we know where they came from, and now we're going to know, okay, what are they doing on the site? So you can kind of see this graph. I'm not going to lie, it's a little tricky to kind of read and kind of get used to, but what it's trying to show you is the green is everyone that hypothetically came into the site. It's almost like the 100% of your users, and it's trying to show you, obviously, the thicker the green line, the more people came in that way. Then it's kind of showing you the red is almost like that bounce rate where people exited, but more importantly is that, so for instance, like this big green square right here is the home page. Well, after someone went to the home page, in this example, then the top one was the company page. Then when they went to the company page, they went to another page. So you can actually kind of follow this matrix and see, once someone gets into your site from the home page or the about page or the service page, what do they do next? So again, while it may be a little tricky to read and takes a little bit getting used to, can be really useful because it gives you a peek inside the user experience of that user as they're navigating your website. And if we see maybe a huge red, obviously it could be a huge red flag to look at, okay, why are people there? Is there something, again, maybe that's the end of the again, user experience, like for instance, a contact page, maybe obviously, or a thank you page. If they get to that, most likely you're going to have a huge red flag, but that might not be bad because you know that that's where the conversion stops or ends. But for instance, if it's on the home page or your service page, maybe it's an idea that, okay, maybe I need to give them something more. Maybe it's embedding a contact form there. Maybe it's giving them a link to the contact page. It's doing something if they're not doing what you want them to do. So the behavior then also looks at all of the site content. So we're going to look at all of the different landing pages and again, be able to compare them together. So, again, we can compare the homepage traffic compared to the services page, traffic. Also with the date range, we can see how, again, those increase. We can see the different blogs that we're writing, how much traffic are our blog pages getting, and, in general or specifically. So, again, we really get to kind of see the top pages viewed, but then really kind of, also the qualitative data that goes along with that as well. You can also attach site search. So this is where you'd actually attach, like Google's has a little site search kind of module. And what it does then is it tracks anytime someone's searching internally on your website. So if you have a search bar already, this is something that could be probably really useful for you to kind of connect to Google Analytics, because then you can actually see what people are searching for on your website. Now, again, this isn't going to show you keywords that people use to get to your website from google.com, but this is going to show once they get to your website and they use your search functionality, what are they searching for? Obviously, this may be if someone's consistently searching for a certain thing, maybe we need to bring that a little bit more front and center. Or just in general, it's good to know what people are searching for, or that people are utilizing that tool. So that can be something that can be useful to you to kind of bring that in there as well. Site speed, this is obviously kind of what it says there. It's going to track the average kind of site speed of your website, making sure that it's as low as possible, but making sure that we just don't see some huge spikes and then it just stays up there. So making sure that we're monitoring that. As we kind of talked about, this can obviously have a huge impact on user experience, which then can be reflected in some of the stats and analytics that we're talking about. And then last but not least, within behavior, you can set up what's called event tracking. This isn't as, and we'll talk about goals and conversions here in a second, but event tracking is a little bit different because you're only tracking when someone's interacting with like a single action of something on your site. So like for instance, this is, you can set up an event tracking for when someone clicks a button, when someone clicks a link to download a PDF. Those are single action. I just click it and I'm tracking that action there. So that's called event tracking. This again can be very useful if you're trying to see how many people are downloading a PDF. How many people are clicking a link to go to another website that's maybe outside of yours? Or just in general, maybe you have a newsletter button that you want to see, okay, how many times are people actually clicking on this newsletter button to sign up for my newsletter? Whatever it may be, if it's just, you're just trying to track a single link, a single button, a single action on a site, that's called event tracking. We can set that up within behavior. Now, Google kind of walks you through that. Otherwise, there's tons of videos and support. Or if you ever need more support than that, like for instance, like we do this, but there's others that do this as well. Or if you have someone internally that knows either just some of the coding or can kind of do that, what I'm getting at is it's nice because once this is set, it's set forever. So you don't, again, just like Google Analytics is, yes, if you start, again, messing around with the rebuilding of your site or the development of your site, it could kind of come undone. But really, as long as you set it there, once it's set, again, to go forever until you turn that off, which is kind of nice. So you don't need to worry about it necessarily as long as it's set up correctly the one time. So again, that's going to be the behavior. So finally, and last but not least, is we've gone over, again, who was on our site the most quantitative data with the audience. Then we kind of started getting more qualitative with audience, or acquisition. People, from audience, how do they get to our site? Then being even more qualitative with behavior is once they got to our site, what did they do? But then now, last but not least, the most qualitative type of data is, okay, I now want to set certain parameters. I want to track certain actions or a user path. I want them to do something specific on my site. I'm going to tell Google Analytics what that is, and then it's going to track it. So like for instance, is we want to track how many times someone fills out a contact form, how many times someone, again, signs up for an event, how many times someone registers for our product if it's a subscription. Those types of things, again, are multi-step things. It's not just one click. They have to click, fill out their information, then submit the form. They maybe have to fill it in, put in their credit card information or whatever it may be. The idea though is that we're setting up kind of a multi-action type of conversion. Another big one that's very easy to understand too is e-commerce. If you sell anything on your site, obviously we want to make sure that we track that. We want to make sure that we're tracking the user experience or the shopping experience. If they're bailing on their cart, again, a lot, maybe we need to try to address that. And there's different programs or email drip campaigns or reminders, text reminders, making sure the speed, shipping issues, things like that we can look into. But this can be a really good either red flag or say, hey, you're doing it well by tracking this. Another thing that this also is really kind of cool to do too is either with goals or more easily e-commerce is obviously with e-commerce, you're going to have a value for that transaction. If I'm selling whatever it may be, if it's, again, sunglasses here, I have a price on these and I'm going to be able to kind of track that on there. But what's also kind of cool is you can put an arbitrary price on any goal. So hypothetically, if you have like your contact form or request a quote now, and you want to arbitrarily say, hey, that's worth about $50, then you can do that. And it just kind of helps some of your calculations. And again, like what we talked about is, when you create these conversions, it actually pulls it into kind of like the acquisition. And now we can start to see, we can see different channels. We can even go further into that, into the different demographics and see which demographics or acquisition or whatnot is pulling in the best type of conversions that we've designated. Now, how we set up conversions can be a little tricky because again, we're dealing with multiple actions, but what's kind of nice is for a lot of like the ones that I've even talked about or the ones that you're probably thinking about is Google has a a lot of templates already registered. So again, they have templates for a contact form, and they'll walk you through and, again, say, hey, are you trying to track it this way? Are you trying to track it this way? And it will walk you through, and then you can kind of implement that coding. Now, again, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, the beauty of it is once you get that set, it's set. So it's only like a one-time thing. It's not something you need to have someone do internally or externally on an ongoing basis. It's really getting it set, and then all of that data is pulled into these reports, and then you're able to, obviously analyze that and apply that. So again, conversions are going to be your highest qualitative data, because this at the end of the day is really what we want people to do. Why we have a website, why we have a business, and why we have marketing is conversions. And this is just setting up and telling Google what that is, and then having it actually track it for you. So with all this, as we start to kind of wrap this up and kind of open it up for some questions, is just really looking at this, that, again, Google Analytics does really three main things. It validates, looking at the different reports, especially like, for instance, like the acquisition report or even the conversion report, we can actually validate our ROI and put an ROI to our marketing efforts. Looking at, okay, I'm spending this on SEO or Google ads or social media, again, and I could actually start to see what that return is to me if I have conversions set up, or just looking at the peer analytics themselves to make sure that we're seeing a growth and we're seeing improvements in all of the different, again, those awesome analytics that we talked about. Strategize, we can use to optimize, the user experience. SEO, I've given you guys a lot of examples throughout it. If that's, site speed, if we're seeing a big drop off with traffic someplace in the behavior ones, maybe we need to analyze that and figure out why. We can really kind of strategize, again, and really kind of figure out what's going on and how we can kind of essentially kind of improve it. Also looking at the year over year or the month over month and figuring out which areas are maybe improving more. Obviously, which ones have a good ROI that we can potentially put more resources of time, energy, and money into. And then last but not least is the discoverability factor of Google Analytics. You may discover, obviously, issues, but a lot of times we're talking more about discovery. Maybe it's a new target market, maybe with the demographics or the geographic. I've worked with a few businesses and organizations that have used a lot of, they're looking at, okay, hey, where do we look to put our next location? We've actually, used Google Analytics as one of those determining factors, or at least a piece of the process, to see, hey, we actually have all these people coming from here or visiting our site from this location. That could potentially be an opportunity to, again, have a location there. Or just in general, like I said, you may find if it's, again, like maybe it's a social platform or a referral platform that you're getting traffic from, and maybe it's not the most amount of traffic, but maybe it's high quality traffic. Maybe it's an opportunity to actually go and do some more with that platform. Maybe it's LinkedIn, maybe it's a referral source, again, a different one out there, whatever it may be. But the idea is that we could actually discover these things that we didn't know about. Now, again, also with Google Analytics, it's one of the kind of the few platforms that I talk about when I do these presentations, and more specifically about SEO, in that just having Google Analytics is not going to help your web presence or help, there are a lot of other tools that we talked about just getting them going, or if you've seen some of our SEO workshops, that just getting those platforms and utilizing those is going to help. Here, that's not the case, but obviously we can utilize this to try to validate, strategize, and discover the new opportunities, ways to improve, that then goes back into, again, those SEO efforts or those marketing efforts, both even online and offline. That, again, I kind of alluded to that at the beginning here too, is that you can utilize Google Analytics to at least try to track somewhat of even the offline marketing that you're doing via like direct or some other reports in there as well. So the idea is this is a super important and integral, again, piece of any marketing. If you're in charge of marketing whatsoever, you should make sure that Google Analytics is installed and make sure that you at least have it up and running or are paying attention to it. So because it's, again, like I said, it's going to be one of those platforms where you're going to be utilizing it to validate everything. And if you're not ready now, that's okay. If you're here, say you're looking at this and saying, hey, Ben, this looks like way too much, that's okay. At least get it started so that when you do, again, come to that point, that you have that data there to start to analyze. And again, I'm not gonna lie, there's a bunch more that we can do with Google Analytics, but as, again, taking you through the top 4 different kind of buckets with audience acquisition, behavior, and conversion. There's a lot there that can be done, and a lot there for, again, some of the basics and even just to start to implement this. So with that said, I would love to open it up to see if anybody has any questions. If you want to chat them in there, that's fine. And I can kind of answer them there. Otherwise, if not, no worries at all. We'll, again, look to kind of wrap it up. But I do want to make sure that we give an opportunity to, again, open this up to some questions, because this is a little bit more higher tech strategy and having to deal with some, analytics and metrics and coding and things like that. So I'll just kind of, be vamping a little bit in case anybody does have any kind of questions there. And like I said, if not, we'll leave it open just for a little bit here. If there's no questions, then we'll kind of just move on. But while that's going on, I just want to remind everybody that if you ever do have any questions, again, if it's just simple questions, marketing questions, again, to reach out, you have my information right here. Also, a couple other things is that, again, we do a lot of these workshops and webinars with great partners like office centers around the Twin Cities here. It's our goal just to truly try to educate as many small business owners as possible with these types of things, to really kind of just, equip yourself and enhance your knowledge about digital marketing. So I encourage you to kind of check those out at skolmarketing.com/workshops, and you just go to the site and you can also find it as well. And then last but not least, I also like to say is we also offer a free consultation. So the reason I mention this is it's not a sales pitch. If you want to talk about our services, awesome. Be more than happy to do that. I just know that a lot of times these subjects are very heady, and obviously I'm talking to kind of a classroom style. And I alluded to that there's a lot of different industries and intricacies. So we like to open it up that if you ever just want to take some time and chat, and we can even strategize with you, it's completely free. It's our way of giving back to the community. And so if you ever want to do one of those, all you do is just reach out and we'd be more than happy to do it. It's really just getting some of our time, free time to really, sometimes people will say, hey, Ben, did I set up Google Analytics correctly? Can you tell me if this is correct for mine? Hey, can we talk about social media? Can we talk about SEO? Whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily have to be about this topic, but just want to offer that and throw that out there for that. So it doesn't look like we had any questions today, which is no problem at all. Like I said, if you do get any questions, feel free to always reach out.
I have a question.
Oh, perfect. Daphne, go ahead.
Did I understand correctly that if you run an ad on social media, that it shows up as social media traffic, not paid traffic?
Correct. Yep, it's going to show up as social media. That's also sometimes where it'll actually show up in referral. So sometimes if you run a paid campaign, not always, but sometimes you'll find it there, but it will show up from there. Now, again, like I kind of alluded to before, is you can keep clicking in. So you can click into social, then you can actually click into Facebook and actually even get more detail. So that's what's also kind of cool. And you can also then start to try to, it doesn't say it 100%, but it will kind of tell you where it was coming from or the page that they went to. So what I mean by that is if you have a post that went to like your blog page, and then you had another post that went to your event page, and then you ran an ad that went to like your promo page, well, you could see where they landed on your site. So then you could obviously discern that these ones were paid and these ones were organic from there, but it still would be in the social traffic. The only ones that are going to show up in paid are mainly going to be like your Google ads or AdWords.
Great, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect. Just want to make sure if anyone else has another, last kind of question, just please let us know. You can, kind of raise your hand virtually or type it in the chat. Otherwise, like I said, feel free to reach out. I know some of this stuff, just as a reminder, you will get a copy of not only this recorded presentation, you can find these on our YouTube channel, but then also I will actually give you guys the slides too as just a reference point. So, because again, I'm not going to lie, I know I talk fast. I know that we go through a lot of these subjects and it may seem like you're drinking from a fire hose. So that's why we want to give you the best resources, and you guys always come back and look to apply this at any point in time. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Will as we kind of wrap this up. I want to thank you guys, again, for having me here today, and hope to see you guys on some other workshops. And Skol.